It's 2:30 sharp, and we'll get started with the third session of today's Agile 100 online conference. We're welcoming now a former colleague of mine and also to some extent mentor, although he doesn't know that he really mentored me, Stefan Smalla. And I'll start with giving you a bit of an introduction about Stefan, and he can of course add to that, and then we'll dive into a conversation. So compared to the previous session we had with Jörg, this is not going to be a presentation. This is going to be a conversation. And the interesting part is, so far in our Agile 100 conference, we've had CEOs of smaller organizations. Stefan, and he will talk about his company, Westwing, is not only the founder, but also still CEO of Westwing, which is a publicly listed company in Germany, fairly big. So it's going to be very interesting for many of you, and including myself, to hear the perspective of someone who has not only built a company, but also is managing a large number of people and trying to do that in very difficult times, as we all know right now. So Stefan, welcome to the Agile 100 online conference. And
Thank you.
We will talk about,
thanks for having me.
Yeah, sure. We will talk about your history a bit. And maybe you can start out with the most important pieces of your professional life so far. Where did you get started and how did you end up at Westwing?
I started, my first entrepreneurial venture was still at home importing basketball trading cards. And I studied business and I did a lot of internships, and I actually stopped my study because I didn't think that was very valuable. And started working for Daimler at the time during the Daimler-Chrysler merger. That's like a bit more than 20 years ago for some time, and then went to New York, worked for how's it called? A real estate company, but that went bankrupt when I was there, and then I needed an internship. So I actually started with a startup in e-commerce in New York, and I liked that a lot. And then I went back home in Germany and continued working for them. And then over time, I kind of really liked that and went to another internet company called Do You, worked briefly for Yamba, which everybody knows from the Crazy Frogs. And then I founded my own company called Friendity. I learned programming. That was in 2003, early stages of social media. Too early, also not very well done. So that shut down. We sold it for a really tiny amount to Bild-Zeitung. And then I went to Bain, or wanted to go to Bain. Then Bain told me, okay, we don't take anybody without a degree. So I had to finish my degree actually. And then I went to Bain, where we got to know each other, spent 7 years there in private equity technology. And then actually thought, no, consulting's not for me. So then I founded Westwing. That was 10 years ago, and been running it ever since. From the early days to now, around 2,000 people, around 400 something million euros of revenues, around 40 million profit last year.
Yeah, cool. So very interesting story. Now let's dive deeper into different areas of that story. Now, before we talk about Westwing and the founding years and taking it to an IPO, I want to make this session a bit about also management lessons that you took away for yourself and management practices that you have established ever since. Because when I was working at Bain, there were managers that were very structured, like you, and the projects that you ran, I mean, they were still like crazy working hours, but different than of those managers that were that structured. So I want to understand a bit where you got those lessons from and how you started implementing those in your daily practices. And maybe we start with Friendity, which was like not your first startup, but already one where you had a bit of experience. And you mentioned yourself, it didn't go that well, maybe because of also execution, but also timing. And can you walk us a bit through the main lessons you took from your time at Friendity?
Yeah. So I think general management, I've been interested in that since I think I was 15, 16, been reading books ever since. And I kept a reading habit. I still read probably 5 to 10 hours every week, and I note down the things that I like, the links, and have like an ongoing kind of document for that. So that's how I learn. And then at Friendity, actually, it was so small there was not really kind of big management lessons were actually me. I was doing the front end development, and then my co-founder did the back end development, and then my brother did the customer care, and that was it, right? So it was really small team. But I think what was important already at the time, and I was exposed to that when I was CTO of the company that I went into after New York. It was called pair programming, and all this agile movement was starting at the time. And what kind of the biggest lesson is kind of iterate, and don't kind of think too much about the project plan or the you know what you're going to achieve in like five months, but maybe just continue moving forward while having a really strong vision. So I think, at least the way I run things is, typically the vision is extremely strict, the strategy is extremely strict. We run Westwing literally right now, 10 years after, with exactly the same things that we actually said we would do when we first pitched venture capitalists. So that kind of the strategy stayed the same. But I think while you move, you need to stay very dynamic and kind of learn what can you do first? How do you get kind of feedback on things? How do you move forward without, pushing yourself too much, but kind of insanely pushing you? And a few general things that I learned there is kind of launch fast. I think you need to launch really fast. There's always this important famous saying, like, if you're not embarrassed by your first launch, then. But I'm still embarrassed what we launched today. That's still the case, right? So most of what we do is, in hindsight, always shit. That's the definition of things, right? So I always tell people when they join Westwing, I tell them, okay, just assume what we do is terrible, because very likely it is, because we have almost no experience in this, and nobody really has. So there's a good likelihood that we can kind of improve on that. So kind of keeping a permanent focus on improving. And I think what I learned, what wasn't like kind of a bad lesson, I shut it down after a year, because I got really, after 4 years working in the internet at that time, it didn't look like in the internet you could make a lot of money unless like really special cases. So I got really like, okay, fuck, like this social network, maybe it doesn't grow, but even if it grows, how can you make money with stuff like this? So I got too shy. I was also very broke at the time. So, and Bain promised to pay a lot of money. So the mistake was kind of quitting too early. I think one of the things that I always told my team at Westwing is that lifetime or time that you can spend alive is the biggest asset that you can have. We just talked about before about Roblox, right? Roblox just went public at, I think, 30 billion valuation. As a, 15 years old company, and the first 10 years, they were basically not going anywhere. A lot of the growth, a lot of the value creation in a lot of companies happens at later stages, while you have to figure out, because nobody can time the market. And maybe if I would have stayed with social media in the beginning, maybe for a few years it would have been rough, but maybe it would have been really great afterwards. So I think the biggest learning is stay at it, keep iterating, and keep pushing forward if the general vision and the market is there and the general fundamentals are there.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'm hearing a lot is very similar to, for example, the things that Jeff Bezos also mentions over and over again, like be stubborn on the vision, but flexible on the details. And I guess there is some reading that you have done also from him, or the interviews that he does. Now, fast forward a bit, you work at Friendity, you work at a few other companies, you start joining Bain. Now, you mentioned that during your time running startups, one of the things that was very important to you and the things that you learned was that constantly inspect and adapt, right? Don't have this very fixed plan. Now, the world of consulting, to some extent, looks different. How was that for you? Suddenly, a very big shift also in how things are perceived and the mindset of people in those organizations, and also the work that we do for the clients.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So I was very interesting. A lot of bright people, a lot of kind of knowledge, a lot of cool companies that you can interact in. But in the end, what I became very aware of at Bain after a year is that the product you sell is slides and advice, which is so clear, but internally the Bain or every consultant always thinks they sell results, and that's kind of what they wish for, and that's ideally also the case, but the client mostly buys advice and slides, not the results, because when you're inside, and that was confused me the most, that the consultants always think that they actually implement the stuff, which typically is not the case. You make the slides and the tough decisions, the implementation has to happen by the actual management. So I tried always to be very close to the management and not get caught up in this kind of what a lot of people in consulting say, we did the restructuring of this, or we did this deal. And I always thought like, no, we didn't, we advised, right? Someone else did the deal, someone else did. So that was kind of confusing, but I got used to that. That's a product that you sell. But that also kind of after 7 years led me to go, because I wanted to actually do the mistakes myself. The funny thing at Bain or any of the major consultancies is there's never a failing project because you basically throw resources at it until it succeeds, or at least until you can tell yourself it has succeeded. And because the margins are so high, so that's a really attractive business model. But it wasn't for me. I wanted to see failures. I wanted to see larger wins and larger losses, because whatever you do at Bain, you leave like once you deliver your proposal, or even if you start helping them implement, but the real results in real life don't come after 2 months. They come after a year or 2 years. So, that kind of didn't satisfy me enough. But what I learned a lot at Bain was like 2, 3 things. And one is kind of this approach at Bain is called answer first, or hypothesis driven, or start with the outcome that you want to have and then work backwards to how you get there. So that I think is very important. Also, when you communicate, like start with the answer. Don't start with all the why it's important, blah, 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 and then you come like start with what's the issue and then drive it. That's definitely the number one thing that I learned at Bain. I think the number 2 thing that I learned is that you sometimes throwing money at problems can help immensely, and sometimes it can destroy immensely. And finding the balance between the two is one of the key managerial decisions that you have to take. So sometimes you need to be hyper aggressive and just solve it with money. And sometimes you need to understand when it's actually not ready to be solved with money. And the third thing that I probably from the many things that I learned at Bain, the third thing also was kind of the value of talent and just getting really, really good people in. And good is defined differently in every business. So the people that succeed at Bain, a lot of them would not succeed at Westwing. Some would, and some are there, and some wouldn't. And you need to identify, but kind of investing into the talent that you kind of bring in the company, and kind of being almost relentlessly hard charging on letting people that have talent run the company. So we typically hire people independent. I don't even look at qualifications or someone. I was surprised a few years ago, one of people I worked with for 3 years actually has a PhD. I didn't even know that. So because when I interviewed them, I don't care. I just care about what they've done, why, and what the results were, and then how can we put them there. So we always say we hire for trajectory over experience, because we don't believe that there's relevant experience in our industry, because our industry is so young. So that I'd rather have someone who comes in and kind of then pushes us forward with a really high trajectory. And that has been changing over time. So now the value of experience in some of our functions becomes bigger, HR, some technology parts, etc., because we're not always reinventing the wheel, right?
Yeah. So thank you for those lessons, right? Now, another thing that probably you also valued during your time at Bain, at the beginning as a more junior person, and then later you were providing the mentoring and coaching to the younger consultants, for example, me, was the really religiously developing people, like putting a lot of effort into having this bright people that are hungry, that are willing to work hard, but then systematically develop them. And I remember in one of the projects, it was a short project that you and I did, but you approached me on day one and you handed me this manager on a page to tell me like, okay, so this is how I work and adjust, and I still have it today. So where did you learn this, and what other management practices did you learn during your time at Bain, which you probably still use today?
So I believe that when you want to learn about management, it's almost everything comes from a huge library of things that other people do. So I read a few books. Some of the books I most commonly refer to are The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz, which is about startups. Then the results take care of itself. The score takes care of itself. It's a book about football coaching. Then a book, the High Output Management
from Andy Grove.
By Andy Grove. So there's a few like that. And I think in the end, there's so many things to solve in management daily. And so you ideally have a huge library in your head where you, for every situation, you can pull the right thing and basically say, okay, that fits in this situation. And then there's a few things that you permanently have, and it should have, like the manager on a page is something, because I believe in transparency, and I also believe that humans are inherently misunderstanding each other a lot. And even after a manager on a page, people understand you not very well. I even published this. I think you could even Google that. So I would like to lay out and have a good discussion. I spent a shitload of time on onboarding new people, because what I find super irritating is that typically people get interviewed for 2 hours, then they get hired, then you spend 2 hours with them and then they go. And that feels so weird to me, because I'd rather spend like 6-7 hours getting to know someone before I hire them. And when they come, like just recently an executive of mine joined, I wrote a paper how I expect them to do their job. We did 2 4-hour sessions onboarding before she joined. Then for the first 2 weeks, I do an daily 1 to 2 hour jour fixe. Then I go to weekly 3 hours jour fixes and call her in between all the time. And then I let her go, and we have this kind of general management cadence. So I really believe in like investing in onboarding. Then I believe in what we call at Westwing a management cadence, which kind of everyone has to follow. By now, we borrowed some from Amazon. So we have weekly business reviews with every kind of leadership team, monthly business reviews, which are a little bit longer quarterly business reviews. And in addition, I have one-on-ones with my directs, and everyone at Westwing is expected to have one-on-ones with their direct reporters at least every 2 weeks, ideally every week. So we believe a lot in kind of interactions, both in groups. These should be short because it's super inefficient to have a weekly 5-hour meeting. But they should be like, with my executive team, I have a weekly business review that typically takes between 60 minutes and 2 hours. And the monthly is like a bit longer. And the quarterly can be 2-3 days. Now in the pandemic, but let's maybe take that topic separately. It's a little bit different because you need to optimize for different things. And then in addition, you have the one-on-ones where you can clarify things. So I do most of my meetings in one-on-ones. I also insist that in the meetings, not a lot of people are usually, because you can't have discussions with a lot of people unless it's a super well-prepared discussion. And then kind of there's a management apparatus that I insist on. So we at Westwing, from very early, we have an org chart that we send out to everyone every month. Like super simple things. Startups don't often do this, and then nobody knows who's what. And I review the org chart every week since 10 years. We have monthly all hands meetings by now every 6 weeks, where I share everything and I'm super open. We have the departments have weekly or monthly all hands meetings. By now I do a weekly Monday morning 5-minute where I just say what's going on, which is a bit harder since we're a public company, but I can still do. So we just invest into communicating, but in efficient ways. So you don't want to have like, okay, let's do something, then it takes 3 hours. You need to kind of always think as a leader about everything that I ask the company to do at a 2,000 person company multiplies to man years of requirements over a year. So I really like work on designing this. And once I have it, I send out like a slide, like paid narrative, or I give an insight session and then I explain it, and then I expect this to be followed. So I think you need to be very clear on what you expect, but those should be limited. And then the last thing is you need to constantly kill the things that you established in the past, because accidentally they always stay. Like you as a leader, you always think like establish this new thing, and obviously people will just get rid of the shitty thing from the past, but it's not. So while you establish new things, you need to permanently cut down. So for instance, every year I review our top 20 KPI reports specifically for many hours, and I cut and I kill KPIs again, which are not useful anymore, because obviously over the year, many new come in, right? So if you don't kill at some point, the reports don't become useful. We just kill reports altogether. And people always complain, but you just need to keep the company in a low complexity, like fast moving way. But these are some of the things I think, I can talk about hours.
Yeah, I sense that, and we'll dive into this. So now you spent 7 years at Bain, and you decide to do something else, right? Go follow the entrepreneurial path, right? Be a cowboy again. You start Westwing, and this was during a period where a lot of German companies were copying what was happening in the US. And I remember you and I had a conversation back then. There was this company, One Kings Lane. I think they're still around. I think so, yeah. But
they almost went bankrupt, and just before bankruptcy, someone bought them.
Yeah, exactly. But it is not so much about the idea. It's so much more about the grit, about the persistence that you put behind it. Walk us through the early years of Westwing and some of the things that you also did early on in order to establish this culture of nimbleness, right? This culture of agility, which we will later talk about when the pandemic hit. And Westwing was one of the companies that benefited from that, if you could say so. But I think you wouldn't have benefited if you hadn't had the culture. So let's start in the founding years and how you started to build that culture.
I think one of the key things, also the way I founded Westwing, is like you need to be very clear what has value to be analyzed and what has no value to be analyzed. Where you kind of just go, okay, fuck it, let's just take a decision, even though I don't feel comfortable because analysis will not take us forward. That was one of the same things with Westwing. I decided after a couple of weeks talking with Delia, my co-founder, that we would found this company. And people always ask me, like, what did you research on the market? And I said, nothing. Like, what the fuck should I research? Like, every person in the world has home and living. Like, everybody buys furniture and decoration. And so this is obviously a huge market. Like, the biggest players are multi-billion euro companies. E-commerce is nowhere. Or e-commerce will happen. That's enough, right? That's literally the whole intellectual base of Westwing. And then you need to define a business model what kind of differentiates you in an extreme way from competition, right? Which I believe very much. And so we have this business model, which still to this day, I think outside of the company, very few people really understand the way we do it. We do most of the things that e-commerce companies typically say they wouldn't do. We force people to sign up, but we have a reason for that, right? We send them every day a newsletter. We have very high margins in our private label, et cetera, et cetera. So I think one of the things how you build the company, and this is still to this day, you need to understand when you just go and when you actually need to stop. And Bezos has this saying about these door one and door two kind of decisions. And I think you need to be very aware that most people are too slow because they always think they can basically get more knowledge by analyzing. So I have a huge belief in just going and learning and then iterating on the details while having a really strong strategy that guides you. So we established that from the beginning. So, the way, one of the things that before we launched, like we were like 10 people or 11 people at the time, 5 co-founders, and then a small team. And at some point I basically said, that was like a month after founding or 1.5 months, and we had nothing yet. So I said, okay, this goes too slow. So I basically I called our VCs and told them, okay, we will come to you in 6 weeks and we will show you the website and it will be live. And then I hung up and told my co-founders and they were really pissed at me. And then we hung a thing on the wall and said, okay, 6 weeks to go. Right. So, and that, like, we literally launched at 3 a.m. on the night before the meeting. And during the meeting, our CTO was literally sweating because the VC actually decided to do an actual order. So he actually did our first order. So I think this kind of like pushing really hard and with really unrealistic timelines very often, because it's not about achieving it. Well, that was about, but most of the times later, it's not about actually achieving it because most decisions are not consequential enough for the company. And it doesn't matter if you're 1 week early or 1 week late, but what matters is that you generally just move extremely fast, right? So I have this super strong belief. Now we're a 2,000 person company, we're big. There's several things which cannot move fast by definition. Like if there's a problem on our payment system, okay, we need to stop and like really look into that. We can't just like, accidentally stop the day's revenues, right? So that changes over time. So you need to learn. But everything that we do new, I insist on extreme speed, like to the point of insanity from the people who talk to you, where you basically, okay, let's set up a YouTube team. and I want like 50 videos uploaded per quarter in like, in 2 quarters, right? So, and they go like, we have nothing. Yeah, okay, bro. Then the 50 videos will be shit. Okay, fine. Like you're gonna improve, but speed is like of the essence. So I think that is key as we went through. I think the other thing is always understanding kind of, it's very similar to what I said before, that you need to kill and establish. You need to understand when phases come, what you need to establish and what you need to kill. So at some point after 2 years, we established OKRs, which I think by now everybody knows. At the time, it was still a bit new. So I read about that in the US. I loved it. I established it. But to this day, we have a super simple version that is not even aligned with anybody. Like we have an Excel sheet that the team needs to have to fill in. They have to align it with their boss on top, but they don't have to align it with anybody else. So there's no like the alignment of all the OKRs. And we actually spend very little time on scoring it, because I believe that the value of those mostly in aligning everyone on the priorities. And then if you achieve a 0.7, a 1.0, or whatever, who gives a shit, right? So in the end, like as a company, so then we established that, but then we took a decision to not establish anything on top, because it just, we always, every year we ask, should we do something fancy with OKRs? But we always feel like, okay, that's simply enough even for a company our size. And at some point we established annual planning, and at some point we established like a upward feedback. So our leaders get feedback from their people. So you establish more and more as the company grows. But I think very key is to never delegate that as a CEO. Because again, that these decisions, if I just say like do an upward feedback, and then it's not done well, 2,000 people suffer, right? So you need to, like, I think the key management system and cadence, you have to literally build yourself as a CEO until the company, I think, becomes really big. I'm not sure if that's a question, but kind of
no. That's
deeper where you are interested.
Yeah, it's actually super interesting to see also that you see the responsibility of building the management system and the cadence with you, the CEO, yeah. Right? This is not something you can delegate to some consultants that come in and make a proposal and you just implement it because it's best practice. It actually needs to fit your company. It needs to fit different stages of your company. So this,
and we do talk to consultants or experts, or whenever, like when I implemented these weekly and monthly quarterly business reviews, I actually for half a year I talked to everyone I could find who kind of does things like that, big companies, small companies. Like I talked to more than 20 people in detail about their management system, read books, like all the things. Then I wrote down a draft, and then I iterated on that draft for weeks myself, and then I shared it with a few trusted people in the company, iterated back, and at some point, okay. And then I rolled it out in my team first before I even rolled it out to the company. And then I iterated it and learned about it again and kind of improved it, and then we rolled it out in a company, right? So I think management system things is not something you want to go fast on because it's so consequential, but still faster than getting everybody to agreement. I think that's one of the other things you asked, like how do you keep the company nimble? There's this kind of, I think Rolf calls it disagree and commit. So kind of, okay, there's a point for debate, and then there's a point for, there's a decision, right? So yesterday, literally we had a meeting where we had like marketing, and we had tech and product, and our creatives and me and a few others. And then we talked about implementing a certain technical solution. And the marketing team wanted something super cool. And our creatives didn't even want to talk about the solution, you want to talk about something else. The product manager had an MVP proposal, and everything kind of became like, we talked for an hour, and it was super annoying because we weren't getting anywhere, because obviously these things never go together. So I basically said, okay, there's lots of important people here in the room, like, and now we make the product manager the decider. He decides, and I told him, you decide, and if everybody's pissed at you, then that's life, right? So, and then we stopped the discussion because there was no point in that discussion ever reaching something positive, right? Because everybody would have been pissed in the end. And then you can maybe educate everyone through 15 workshops, and then everybody in the end is frustrated, but understands why it has to go this way. So very often at Westwing, we just say, okay, the frustration is part of it, so deal with it, right? Just deal with it. Yeah. Same in the pandemic, when I told everyone, okay, go home to your home office, or when I now tell them, now we're going to have more meetings in the office again, then people go, I don't feel comfortable. I said, well, yeah, tough life, come, right? Like you can't debate everything with everyone. At some point, you just take a decision, you're transparent, you explain it, and you move forward. Getting agreement from everyone in any group of more than 10 people, I think, is literally impossible. So we try to make decisions and have people who are responsible and they take the decision, and they also have to take the criticism. Okay, and not everybody needs to agree, not everybody needs to be happy. It's not everybody's job to make everybody else happy. So I think happiness is an overused concept, because one of my core beliefs, maybe I should have said earlier, one of the leadership things that people most appreciate is success. Like they want to lead, they want to work for a leader who creates success, not just the CEO, like everyone individually in every one of the areas. And if you're not creating success, team will not be happy anyway. And if you're creating success, people will be not worried about things that usually would be worried about. My favorite example was FC Bayern München, the soccer club, or Real Madrid or whatever. In one season, they became champions. Everyone goes like, "Oh, this coach is great. I love to sit on the bench. This is great for the team, the atmosphere, the fans, the press. I love it." Next, like same team, same everything. Like they're in fifth place. This is shit. The coach is benching me. I don't want to like. It's the same thing. It's just success, right? So I believe if you create success, everything else takes a backseat. Obviously, you want to be honest and fair, etc., and that's super important. So there's no tolerance for any like deviation there. But on a base of like good moral compass, the only thing that really matters is success.
Yeah,
and that's how you keep the company fast. You can't make everyone happy.
I agree to that. So the past few days, I participated in a training for a while, and one of the key quotes that stuck with me was, if you want to be liked, don't be a leader, sell ice cream. Yeah. And what I'm hearing here is it goes, I mean, you don't want to be disliked, but sometimes you have to take the hard decisions. And in most cases, I mean, ultimately you can, as a leader, if you want to delegate all of those hard decisions, you're not really.
I think it's even worse. It's the opposite. I actually take a lot of the unpopular decision from my junior leaders and take it myself, because otherwise it's so hard for them to take it themselves. Like we had this discussion when we sent everybody home that could work at home. And then we had discussions, there's people who can't really do their job at home because photographers or in the warehouse, etc. And then there was discussions if, okay, but can they also stay at home if they feel uncomfortable? And I said, no. And then there was discussion, like, what do you do if then someone wants to stay at home? And I say, well, you offer them unpaid vacation. And if they don't want to do unpaid vacation, you want to be paid but not come. I said, well, then they fire them. And then I actually sent a message to the whole company to make that clear, because it was very clear to me in that moment. A lot of junior leaders have a lot of uncomfortable discussions right now with their team. Like, should I force this photographer? I mean, he could theoretically do it maybe at home, but it's not a good output. So I told every leader, I gave them permission to say, okay, you decide who can work in the home office, and we still have 84% home office share, right? So it's like, this is really like a one person in a while discussion, but it's very important to, as a senior leader, take the shit decisions for your junior leaders, because they're not used to that. And then you give them permission how to operate, right? And then they can focus on other things.
That's how you enable them. Now, you talked about decision making. And you talked about disagree and commit. And in one sentence, you mentioned, for example, the product manager having the decision. Now, here you're taking one of the frameworks that we applied at Bain, the rapid framework, I guess, right? To your probably daily work with teams, etc. Are there other frameworks that you're currently using as a leader in order to drive better and faster decision making, in addition to rapid and disagree and commit?
I don't really use rapid. We just use the D part of that.
Okay.
I think one thing that we really try to use is at Bain, it was called situation, complication, solution. So if you don't know how to formulate something, try to break it down. What's the situation? What's the problem, the complication we're trying to solve? And what's the solution? Or at least if you don't have the solution yet, what's a suggestion? So we try to kind of use that if we're unclear on things. And I try to coach and teach that. I think another thing that we do, that's not, well, a lot of good organizations have this. At Apple, it was called a DRI, a directly responsible individual. So and that's where the rapid frameworks, I think, is a little bit too theoretical for companies our size. So we basically say, okay, that person is responsible to make everything happen, not just the decision, but also kind of then perform in that rapid framework logic. So we try to have DRIs for things, and we will break the organization to have DRIs. It's more important, like the example that I said, when we established YouTube as a marketing channel, like the most important thing for me is to have a DRI, to have someone who's responsible, the head of YouTube, even if we don't know what that person will do yet. Or we have a refer a friend feature on the site. And 5 years ago, it was unmanaged, it was just a feature on the site. And then at some point I said, well, that's actually like, we could do like a significant, rather large share of our new customers from this feature. Who's responsible? And then our marketing chief said, nobody. And I called our CTO, who's responsible? I said, nobody, it just exists. And then I said, okay, let's put someone in marketing, the head of refer a friend. And then we said, what will the person do? And I said, I don't know, but like, they will figure it out. And now that channel has increased 8 times in value for us since 5 years, since we have this person. So I think I believe a lot in DRIs, and like when someone is not responsible, or no, when something exists where nobody's responsible for, you literally either, I believe, have to kill it, like actively kill it, or find someone who is responsible for, because if it just exists in the organization without responsibility, it will create complexity, because a lot of people over time will think they're responsible and do all kinds of shit, right? And then another concept that we typically indirectly use at Westwing is like the core from the core, like this logic that a company has a core, and if you can decide any investments in the world, one that reinforces your core is the best one. So we, every year when we do the investments and decide what to do next, we want to always look back at what can strengthen our core, right? And what wouldn't. And we will very strongly, even if the outside the core investment case is vastly better as a business case, we will still take the one inside that reinforces the core, because it probably has a higher hidden financial value that we can't really articulate. And we did a lot of mistakes in the first 2 years of Westwing where we didn't do that. So that's kind of been reinforced through the mistakes of the first 2 years
that you made. Okay. So now you told us a story about the very early years at Westwing. Now, obviously you launched, and you launched successfully. First customers came, started to buy stuff, you raised some more money, and the team grew. Now, how did your management, your personal management approach change from a 10-person startup to 100 people to ultimately 2,000 people? What kind of lessons do you see in that journey?
Yeah, I think one thing that didn't change but becomes very different over time is kind of, I always said, okay, as a founder, you basically have to permanently give away what you currently do to someone else, because otherwise the company can't grow. So whatever I did in the beginning, you have to find someone that runs it, and then you move on to something else. So even today, I define my job as, okay, I will even review my calendar every week for that and say, okay, which meeting should I actually not have been there if our company would have been better, right? So what was the leader? I was in that meeting, what was missing? Like, and then a lot of meetings as a CEO, you still have to do, but kind of like what's missing. And then I try to think, and if there's a pattern emerge, we will set up a department, we'll set up a new process. I change my management style and give it away and not get involved anymore. So kind of that logic has always stayed the same, but what that means has stayed very different from a kind of 10-person company to a 2,000. In a 10-person company, you still do a lot yourself, and it's a lot more coaching and a lot more spending a lot of time with people explaining decision logics, how you want to approach things, shadowing them, and doing immense deep dives. Like when we, for instance, had in 2012, our logistics almost broke because nobody had ever done in Europe successful home and living logistics. Really hard with like breaks and everything. So I actually decided, okay, I'm going to like only spend 1 day of my week with a kind of management. I'm actually going to become the head of the warehouse. So I went to Berlin for where our warehouse was for 9 months and actually run the warehouse myself to establish all of this myself. And then I hired someone actually from within the team, and then they ran the warehouse, and that was that. And so in between on the things that are really hard to solve, in the beginning, you have to do deep dives yourself. You have to really run it, and not just like help. You actually have to run it because it's so complex that it's very hard to find the right person because you don't really know what you're looking for yet. Over time, that changes because right now it makes no sense because the expertise in the areas that we have is so high that I can't just come in anymore and say, have you thought of this? And they were like, thought of this, we've tried 15,000 versions of this shit and none works, right? So basically now my job is much more identifying leadership principles and leaders that I want to apply to a certain area and really work with them to understand their business so I can set targets and goals that are appropriate, and spending time on the kind of the recruiting and coaching angle of that, but to a different degree, not diving deep. I think that was one of the things. The other thing is that just financials become more important. I mean, there's just reality, right? If you, in the beginning, you have no financials, and even if they are, you lose money anyway. So a lot of things don't really matter that much. But then over time, financial discipline becomes really important because a percentage points difference in a 400 million euro company on something that you do wrong is 4 million euros. So that's just like the mistakes become bigger, but also the opportunities become bigger. So you want to establish financial discipline on things that are important. In the beginning, one thing that was really interesting, and that I still sometimes when we do new businesses, new departments, there's a misconception that everything has to be run well in percentage. So people always think, oh, but that's an unprofitable sale. Because it's like minus 50% profitability. But if you're only selling 10 pieces, it doesn't matter. So people sometimes optimize for the percentage too early instead of just getting shit done and then working the percentage to a better place and just saying, okay, fuck it, we're just gonna like air freight this, although it's like makes the whole order process unprofitable, but at least we learn and we get something done. So kind of you always need to understand when can we invest certain euros in total amount and throw it at a problem to learn before you scale it, so we don't accidentally scale something that kind of never works, right? And that I think is very abstract as a concept, but I think it's very important to limit yourself from scaling before you don't have a customer focused solution, and then while you scale you can mostly get it down in cost and profitability. That's just how capitalism works.
Yeah. So that ties in again to launching things fast, right? Doing things that don't scale. And then over time, once you see that there's a product market, customer fit, whatever, you can figure out better ways to do it.
Can I make one example? Because that was like super impressive by one of our team. So one of the things we're trying right now is we're trying to deliver products ourselves. So the large products like sofas, etc. So we hired someone actually from Bain. And one of the worries with Bain people is that they always start to analyze before they get going. And we told her like, go super fast. Like ideally, like you literally rent a truck in the first week. And the cool thing was like literally within 4 weeks, she did the first delivery to a customer, which was mind blowing at the size of our company. Like she literally came in, she started renting a truck. She hired 2 drivers. She called the warehouse and said, okay, ship me a few orders. She arranged with customer care that they know that we are shipping this. And then she called the customer and said, we're going to ship it. Like that is and that is so important because now we're learning so much faster. Like this business is now half a year. She started, I think, September 1st. So it's half a year old. We're now shipping. We now have 8 trucks, 16 drivers. We're shipping 1,000 orders per month. And we're discussing if we should roll this out to cities outside of Munich. And that would have never been possible if you've done an analysis. And this is one of the things, what the fuck do you want to analyze with delivering sofas? Like if it's profitable, there's a shitload of companies doing this. Like, and then what's the analysis paralysis then going to do for you, right? You're just going to figure out what all the others have figured out, but you're actually only going to theoretically figure it out. So just delivering trucks yourself and delivering products yourself, getting the truck, hiring the drivers, learning what kind of works, what doesn't work, gets you the learning curve up so fast. And we then talked, even after 4 months or so, we talked to someone from another company, and the learning is actually not that big because that business model is just so simple. It's all about the execution. So that was a great example where even in a large company, if you have a DRI, a person that only focuses on this, we tell her, I don't actually care if you buy the cheapest truck or if she spends 10,000 euros more on a truck than she should because she has no clue what a cheap truck is. I don't care. We can figure it out once we get 100 trucks. Right now, what she did is amazing, because now after half a year, we actually deliver 1,000 orders per month. So, and now I can work that, and now for Q2, her OKRs will be work the costs down, and I'm sure she's going to do it, right? But now we have something that customers love. The NPS is 93, etc. So that's great.
Yeah. Amazing example. So Matthias is putting in the chat, like, because another speaker was also talking about doing things that don't scale. So what does that mean? I think one of the example that Stefan just provided is exactly in that direction. It doesn't scale having an executive or a senior manager or whatever doing the delivery to the customers, right? But in the beginning, it's really good to do that. One of the most famous examples out there, if you Google doing things that don't scale, you actually get an article from Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator, and he talks about the founders of Airbnb flying to New York and taking pictures in apartments themselves, which obviously doesn't scale, but you get to know a lot about your customers and you learn and all of those things. So in the beginnings, it's super important to do those things instead of getting stuck in analysis paralysis.
I think there's another way. We never use this term, or we use a term that's, I think, almost the same in result. We always say effectiveness before efficiency.
Yeah.
Because it's much, much harder to get something that actually works. And it doesn't matter, even if it costs like 5 times of what it would cost to be profitable. If you have something that customers value or that just works, so it's being effective, it solves the solution, it solves the problem, then you have something, and then you cut the cost. And that's where, however, if you turn the other way and you start with efficiency, you're going to start making something efficient that maybe doesn't even work, so you have to change it again. So we really start with like, okay, let's first I told her that person is a good example actually. I told her, deliver something and you have to have NPS above 80. So it has to be massively better than the third-party providers, right? And then if you get that done, then we can figure out. So you have customers who are happy, you actually deliver stuff, otherwise customers wouldn't be happy. Then we can talk about how we break down the cost. And because she comes from Bain, she's anyway always thinking about that. So I always have to tell her, like, not yet. Now it's the time. Like, but a couple of months ago we had a discussion. I said, don't focus too much on costs. It doesn't matter yet because you're only running it with 2 trucks. The real cost insights will come when you run it with 10 trucks and drivers are sick and kind of shit happens, right? So I think this effectiveness before efficiency is something that's super. Same with when you launch digital products, like the typical agile stuff, right? Just launch something that the customer will like. If it's actually programmed super well in the back end, sometimes not that important. Let's make sure it works. But then sometimes you know that it's going to work, right? Because you're just copying it from someone, like you're improving the checkout and something that everybody has. Well, then you can immediately go to efficiency. But like, I think in new things, effectiveness before efficiency. Just get it done somehow, whatever it costs.
Get it done and then learn from it. So we have 5 more minutes, and I'm very mindful of your time, Stefan. I know you're a busy executive with all the things that you do. Now, the pandemic hits almost exactly a year ago. What goes through your head as the CEO of Westwing?
Well, first, it's not that it hits and immediately everybody knows what it means, right? So I actually started realizing it when Bill Gates, I think end of January, put 100 million euros into a COVID research project or so. And it was like, holy shit, this guy is not messing around. And basically said, like, we're pushing everything to COVID. And we had an office in China and an office in Milan. So it was pretty visible. So I started just like from, I think, mid-February for 2 weeks, I basically read for 100 hours a week. Like I literally I canceled most meetings and just started getting educated, right? And then it dawned on me that it's like really, really, really serious. So we established a task force where every executive was in and other leaders. And we took a few decisions because in the beginning, it looked like everything would be negative. So we increased actually our orders. That was a good decision. Others did the opposite. We increased our orders from suppliers because we believed that supply chains would be broken. And we started investigating sending people home. A week later, we sent everybody home as one of the first companies, I think, in Munich, where people were really, my company even told me, like, he's fucking nuts, right? This is just a flu. Why do we have to go home? And then 2 or 3 weeks later, people were really happy that we sent them home. Right, we established mask requirement in the office way before it was official because it was super clear that masks would help, but just the officials didn't want to say it because they were afraid of the masks. And we started sourcing masks. We also sourced some for a local hospital. So we started like kind of preparing for the worst. Sent people home, had the mask requirement in the office, didn't have most people in the office, mask requirement in the warehouse. For people in the beginning, we did a survey. They said, are you crazy? Like, why do we have to wear the fucking masks? Like, now they're happy about it. And then it turned out that actually after 4 or 5 weeks of rumbling, actually our customers started buying more because people were at home. And then we had to, and before we had frozen every cost. We had, not hired, we killed the hiring list, and we asked everybody to sign a Kurzarbeit waiver, which people sometimes obviously wouldn't want to sign, but apart from one person in the whole company, everyone signed on their own. And then actually it turned out it's the opposite, like demand skyrocketed. So we literally had to double our staff in the warehouse in 4 or 5 weeks. And they are helped to do that because I called the people and did exactly that. I said, I don't give a shit what you pay people, just solve it. The orders are coming in, we have to ship them, otherwise the warehouse will be backlogged. We'll fix all the cost problems later, right? And actually there was no cost problems because people were available and everything worked out quite fine. But we also rented the warehouse, an extra warehouse to have more stock. And they said, well, it's going to be a little bit more expensive. It doesn't matter right now, the business, like every margin we can make, let's just take it, right? Who knows what happens through the year. And then we were always every month scared that everything would fall apart again. But I think what we now see is that there's quite a permanent shift to more online and e-commerce. So I think we're now, actually after then a few months, like from May, June, July, actually the company was running pretty normal again, like super boring in that sense, just everybody in home. And now the challenge comes of what we call team cohesion and culture. So that's a big challenge, mental health of employees, etc., just being stuck at home. So we're bringing people for important meetings back to the office to make sure people still kind of socially interact with each other, which is very important.
Have that connection. All right, Stefan, being mindful of your time and everybody else's, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you taking time out of your calendar and sharing your story.
And enjoy your conference. Hope you learn a lot.
Thank you so much.
He's a great guy, so you can learn a lot from him. We basically talk mostly about me, but I'm sure he talks about his business on the side as well.
Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.